So, Dr. West, in this book, with these 10 elements, you talk about calling, you talk about character, or charisma, and that's really on from God. You know, we're called. That's who we are, that God created us to be. So some people would ask the question, are Christian leaders or pastors, are they born? Are they made? Are they called? I mean, is it a combination of both? If someone were to say, are leaders born or made, what would your answer be?
I think the majority of leaders develop in certain circumstances. Now, within the Christian community, we would say that God calls individuals into specific areas of leadership or into specific areas to help the body. But within that, whatever the calling is, there are ways of increasing and improving leadership as we go throughout life. So leaders are not necessarily born, I don't believe. I think more leaders are called by God, and then leaders develop their leadership skills and abilities throughout their life.
West, you oversaw, this amazed me, you oversaw the religious care of 2.5 million servicemen and women in combat zones in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. What would you say in those situations, what were your greatest leadership challenges?
I think the greatest leadership challenge there was the same as it is in any organization, and that is working with people from a variety of backgrounds, and especially within chaplaincy, you're working with faith groups of all different types, be it Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, Protestant, even Wicca. So again, learning to work with those individuals who were other leaders, if you will, within those groups. And number one, not being intimidated by them. And number two, not being condemning of them. And oftentimes we tend to look at the negative side of things. And for example, I also had the opportunity to work with the senior religious leaders out of Pakistan, Afghanistan, who oversaw some of the most radical madrasas in the world. And to sit across the table from those individuals and have a dialogue with them and help move them even just a little bit toward reconciliation and de-radicalization, which, by the way, we were able to do. I was able to do that because of what I learned early on. The first conference I held in Bahrain for some of those chaplains and brought them together, we brought in a speaker that had lived in the Middle East for a number of years, an American. And he said there are three important things when working in this area: relationships, relationships, relationships.
Wow.
And so the most challenging and most probably important aspect of working in any organization is building those relationships with individuals and allowing them, as one of my leaders, one of the guys that I was working for told me, just be yourself and accept others for who they are. And we do that in the context of also not compromising. We can't compromise certain things when we have dialogues and when we're interacting with folks. For example, when I'm dialoguing or interacting with a Muslim, and one of my good friends, he and I would have these conversations, he would say, but we're all related through Moses. And I would have to correct him and say, well, once we get to Abraham, things changed a little bit. And, you know, the lineage I go back to is not the same one you go back to. And so my faith is built on that line and Jesus Christ and what he did. And then I'm able to present to them my belief and my understanding of what salvation is all about. And we have sat in numerous rooms with people of varying faith groups and had those kind of conversations. But that understanding of accepting individuals and building those relationships allow those conversations to take place. And I think for pastors, regardless of the size of congregation, that's one of the most important things they could do for themselves is to build those relationships with other pastors and to have those kind of discussions. I recall sitting in Djibouti with an Air Force chaplain of a different denomination and another Army chaplain of another denomination. And I've sat around with Navy chaplains of other denominations. Now, it's not just the difference in denominations that we had to overcome, but the differences in the service cultures as well. And so understanding and accepting the individuals for who they are and where they're serving, that is one of the most important things.
That's great. That's great. And to kind of bring this to a close, I'm thinking about someone who might be watching this, might be someone who's even thinking about going into the chaplaincy in the military, or maybe a young person who's thinking about becoming a pastor. What would be some kind of advice you might leave them with for individuals that are thinking about military chaplaincy or even thinking about the ministry?
I think the most important thing I could say is know that God has called you. Again, going back to that calling aspect. Right. And understand the gift that God has bestowed upon you, that charisma aspect as well. Because I firmly believe that God gifts individuals with certain endowments, and a lot of people tend to call them spiritual gifts. I stay away from that term because I think that kind of leads people to believe there's a certain list, a finite list. I'm not so convinced that there is. In studying this and working through my dissertation, I find that Paul says that God gifts the body with whatever it needs in order for it to be beneficial. And so one of the aspects of becoming a chaplain, an individual will need to understand is you're going to be working in an environment where there are people of all varying faith groups. Mm-hmm. And if you're comfortable in working in that environment and not necessarily being combative in those environments, then chaplaincy would be a great thing for you. In addition to that, chaplaincy, you work a lot with families there and counseling families and individuals as well. So if God has placed that upon your heart as a passion of working with families and helping them in difficult situations, because again, a lot of times they're not going to come to the chaplain until there's a problem and there's a difficult situation. And so you're almost doing crisis ministry on a routine basis. I know some of that happens within the congregation as well, but there are some differences within the military. So understand your calling and have that passion, if you will, what God has placed within you to work in those particular situations.
And also just kind of one more thing about your book. I know a lot of pastors, will see that, that term leadership is used so often. Oh, great. Here's another leadership book I'm going to read. What makes this book different in your mind?
I think one of the things that makes this book different is, number one, I brought alongside some of my military experiences as a practical application. But in addition to that, at the end of each chapter, I have a specific set of questions and thoughts for reflection that pastors can use to look inside themselves on each one of these elements and say, where am I? How am I doing on this? Where can I do better? How can I do better? So it's not just a book to read and put aside, but it's one that you look at and you go back to and you continually are asking yourself and evaluating yourself, how am I doing in this area? Now, here's the thing about this. Those 10 elements, there are two, calling and charisma, that we have absolutely nothing to do with. That's all God, and God does it. It doesn't mean that others can't help identify that and help us to understand that, but we can't increase our calling, for example. We can't increase the charisma that God gives us. That's all God. Mm-hmm. But those other elements, we can evaluate. I can work with pastors. I can coach pastors. I can mentor pastors in those particular areas that they want to see an increase in, or they want to see a change in. Similarly, we can take this book and we can work in a seminar over a period of time with pastors and helping them understand in greater detail what it means. For example, the community aspect of it. When you look out there in the business world, there's this sense of community index scale where individuals can take that and they can measure where they are within their sense of community. And one of the things I did was develop what I call the ecclesial sense of community index scale. And so it's geared specifically for pastors to take a look and say, how am I functioning in these areas of community that I talk about in the book? So again, there are ways of measuring some of these things, but there are multiple ways of helping pastors come alongside of them. Pastors can also take this book and use those questions at the end to lead a small discussion group with 2 or 3 other pastors and helping, as we say, iron sharpening iron.
So Dr. West, what's the best way to get your book?
One of the best ways of getting the book is on theleadershippyramid.com. That's the website for the book. It's also available on Amazon and Google and Barnes & Noble and other outlets online there.
Okay.
It's available in both, or it's available in hardcover, paperback, and ebook.
Okay. Well, listen, Dr. West, I just want to thank you so much for your time today. I loved your book. I just want to encourage everyone who's watching this to get a copy of this book. You don't even have to be a pastor, because really these 10 essential elements, I think, work for any Christian leader. And if you get a chance, order the book, buy the book, use it as a small group study. Now, Dave, do you take speaking engagements?
I do. And you can reach me at theleadershippyramid.com. And there's a space on there that you can submit an email to me, or you can email me at leadershippyramid@gmail.com.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you again, Dr. West, for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.